That said, I would recommend that you watch all of those, though. There's the Elberton one is too long and too meandering, and I don't.
Well,
I think there's some biases at work there
with the Wyatt guy, which is interesting. Like, it's just them, because it's kind of like they cutting to his interview the whole time. Because he's the one that knows the most info about all this stuff. Everybody else, the rest of it, they just cut.
He's the source of the entire story.
The rest of it, they just cut a bunch of Looney Tunes going, I think it's the devil stuff. And like,
I think it might be the Illuminatis of the Build-A-Bears.
And it's,
no.
And we talked about there's like real religious thing to it. Everybody's like, but that one guy was pretty progressive too, though, because because everybody it's just kind of a funny thing because everybody's like, you can tell people have come around asking about it, maybe in weirdos and stuff, and they're like, now I'm a good Christian, so I don't get into this, like, because people are like, is this a devil worship? And they're like, no, it's not that at all. But the one guy was, I guess there's the guy that they interviewed with the glasses. I guess he just runs it or maintains it. Remember, and he was saying that. He started off going, I was like, oh, this guy's, he's like, I don't, sometimes they do their rituals or whatever here. As long as they don't graffiti it, I'm fine with it. And he's like, yeah. But then he goes back to like, but you're all good Christian. Like, they get into this thing. It's a very, because
there were some weird religious arguments that popped up at the time. Right, there were some people, representatives of the church in Elberton, that were really against them building it in the first place. And that voice has been sort of present throughout ever since, of people saying, this is going to draw in Satanists and they're going to be sacrificing people. It's like, it's just rocks. Well, but
that's why it's sort of, and one time it kind of demystifies a lot of it, with the guy's papers is in his IBM case. But then also at the same time, it makes it more of an impressive feat at that time to do that and get that approved, because watching this, I mentioned to you before offline that watching this, it's like you see all these people and they're real Southern. You and I both grew up in Georgia, in the South and stuff, and it just reminds like, oh yeah, this is like family reunion people that I talking. I was like, they're real.
I know every one of these guys.
I mean, if you're not from the South, you get like the version that's like on parody and stuff, but there's people in here that like are just really Southern people and like do the way they talk. They're like, well, it's the same kind of way, same way North Dakota people are the same. It's like they're very just down to earth, salt of the earth, conservative people, and so just the fact that this got off the ground with all those insinuations at that time, it's pretty crazy. You know what I mean? It's kind of interesting that it got made at all, which is, that's what I was kind of fascinated by.
Yeah, that reason prevailed in that. Well, I think, money does make a big difference. So, like, first of all, they're paying a lot of money to have this thing done. Second, this is a thing that's going to sort of put Elberton on the map. People are going to come to Elberton to see this thing.
Well, I guess the timing's right, too, because it's right after the gas crisis and all the stuff's coming out of 79, right? All the Carter demonstration, that was a rough time economically and all those things. So, yeah, maybe people are looking to... And you said the Cold War. It's like, why not? Sure, let's just do this.
Yeah. Well, and it was at a time where people, I don't know. I don't know. I want to say that's a time where people weren't as expressive of outrage about minutia. That's probably not true, but it is a little bit like this idea of organizing a movement against something that bothers you really wasn't as big a thing. We didn't have the vehicle for it without social media and the internet. You just had a few guys standing out going, no good will come of it. And that was pretty much it. Yeah, you don't get
conspiracy theories without radio shows and without podcasts and stuff. I get what you're saying. Like, you didn't have this cult of thinking around things that everything that happens is a conspiracy. I mean, sure, the Kennedy stuff and all those things, but they were not... Like people,
but it didn't have quite as effective a feedback loop as we get now,
especially in that
just
town,
because of the physics of it.
Yeah, and especially in that town, it's just a different time. And it's like he even says that in there, and I say that thing all the time too with people when working stuff like, well, I can only take a man for his word, so he said he was a good Christian. So it's like very just straightforward. They had the money, and I can't think of a reason why not to do it. And it's like, all right. it's like,
well, and
it's
also
kind of a nice
he
time.
says
It's kind
throughout
of
the
heartwarming.
documentary that they sort of had a friendly correspondence for many
they were
years after that.
friends.
It's a very nice little relationship.
Yeah.
They were just regular kind of
It's like,
folks.
well, I had my
It's a
gallbladder
funny
surgery
thing.
on Saturday, and it's like, this is kind of touching at the end. You're like, it's less mysterious and ends up being more human, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I think that should be the takeaway.
Right.
Because we can get into it and probably will in a few minutes, because R.C. Christian, under the pseudonym of Robert Christian, actually published a companion book to explain what the Guidestones were and what their purpose was, and that explanation doesn't help. I can tell you, like,
It's not helpful.
it's not terrible, but it doesn't allay, because the concern was, like we said, the number one was we got to get it down to 500 million. Number two is like a direct follow-up. It says, guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. Nothing there sounds by itself sinister, but when you're as soon as saying this is the number of people that you have to keep it at, and number two is so watch reproduction, that's where it takes on a sort of weird undertone. Like, well, wait a minute, no. So that seems like you're saying, that seems like a clarification of number one.
Right.
Like, you're not just saying, like, work on your fitness and diversity. That you just threw that second part into it. But number two says guide reproduction wisely. And there's a bunch of stuff in the book that goes into their, I say they because in Dark Clouds Over Elberton, it's implied pretty clearly that there were two people behind the construction of the Guidestones and behind the Robert Christian name, and I'm not sure if they both contributed to this book or just one of them wrote it, but I would say they would probably be these two guys, and they seem throughout the book have some pretty serious feelings on the dangers of overpopulating the world and what nations should be doing to legislate that and control that, and it's not good.
It's not
because that stuff I'll just say that stuff never impacts the rich so much as it does the poor.
Yes.
Like all these the notes for improving the future is all about deregulating the rich and taking care of the welfare society, nipping all that in the bud.
Yeah, it's a tough look for my man Christian. It's like
it's not a great look if you're trying to explain that the Guidestones are a purely good and decent
or they're
thing.
a beacon of humanity or something.
Or reason, because it's the book's called Common Sense Renewed. It's obviously a nod to common sense, but it kind of irks me because there seems to, and we see this today, there's a sort of underlying tendency to equate a lack of empathy with reason.
Right.
Or lack of sympathy with common sense. Like, of course, we can't have a welfare state for the poor because we just don't have the resources for that. So,
right.
Yeah, but there's kind of an elephant in the room that you're not admitting, because you're acting like the poor are the big draws against the public pool of resources,
right.
And that's not necessarily true. But anyway, I won't get into it too deeply, because then it just does become a sort of political diatribe. But in terms of some people's fears about what they're saying in those first two commandments, you're not 100% off. Like, it's nobody saying that we should literally be like getting rid of people, but there's a lot of language in there about nations creating legislation to limit their people's ability, and the sort of a lot of very vague language on how they should be picking the right people,
right,
to be able to do that. And there's like a whole chapter on which people should be allowed to vote. I mean, it corkscrews a lot through a lot of uncomfortable territory. But I do believe at that time that those guys probably, I mean, they were agnostic to that because of the position they were in. Like, they just thought, this is the way things should be. Like you said, we grew up in Georgia, So you find yourself in a bubble where everybody thinks a certain sort of thing. You think it until you step out of that bubble, and then you meet other kind of people like, wait a minute, there's places in the world where other people think other things, and their situation's completely different than ours, and maybe my range of experience and knowledge is too limited to be making all these decisions without further information.
Right.
And so I'll chalk these guys up to being a product of their time, because they don't say anything dastardly, but it's like everything that they say is common sense in that book always strikes me as like, who gets to decide that? Like, ooh, I can see where that's going. This is not good. But their hearts, I will accept their hearts were in the right place, because they thought, we're about to blow each other up with nuclear war. They're very much against war as an answer to anything in the book. I think that's good. They have some of their ideas are interesting about we should form a world Congress just like we have United Nations, and it should be based in Moscow to offset the United Nations being in New York. And then like, okay, wow, all right, and there should be a world army to enforce this. Like, all right, that's not going to happen.
Well, if you want to dig down into just the implications of this, and that's why we always talk about, I like a lot of these topics because they're kind of such interesting story ideas from like a writer's perspective. There's an untold story here that's just something that it's like, if you take away just like, no, it's not a conspiracy. They're not a deep dark worshiping dead animals or whatever that they're not in robes and doing this thing, but it's like these really, because when they go and and they track down who he might have been, it's like these No, I'm not gonna. There is some language in there, that stuff that gets a little creepy. But it's like these simple folks in the country. They're like, "Oh, we got to do something about that." You know what I mean? They're like thinking on this global level, which doesn't really happen in the small town in the '70s, right? And like just saying, it's kind of a. No matter, I mean, we're not going to defend the motivation, not defend any of that stuff, but just the vision of that coming from a place like Alberton, and they're from some other place too. It's like. Kind of impressive though, that actual amount of like thinking they want to get involved in national or global politics and global reconstruction, and to do something like that and that's not even tied to like an official organization or religion or something that it has tied
they specifically didn't want it to be. Like the whole reason of the anonymity was simply because they knew, or at least this was their stated reason, and I believe it, which was if it's a mystery, then people are going to remain interested. They're going to come up and see the Guidestones, and they're going to be studying what the Guidestones say and all that. But if you start tracing it back to who said what, then you're going to apply it to the context of who that person was. You're going to deconstruct it. It won't be a mystery. It won't be interesting anymore.
Right.
So, and I think, overall, despite, disagreeing, I mean, this book is more or less an elaborate and eloquent treatise on how society should eat its poor, if I were to read it through a certain lens. But I do think that they were trying to think of a way to move past war as an answer to all of the nation's problems, a world where we could find unity not just with each other but with nature. I mean, a lot of what is said in this book and in some of these other commandments that they put on the Guidestones themselves is really about conservationism, and I can hear that thunder. Yeah, that's just a complete coincidence.
Thunder, really? I don't think so.
Yeah, but a lot of it is about how we should try to be, in balance with nature. Like the very first one that said keep the human population down was also saying this is to maintain balance with nature, because I think that number is low. Because I think low. A lot of our resource issues, it's the Thanos argument, because the Thanos argument is there's just way too many people. Right. Like, look, man, like I can't speak for the rest of the universe, but on Earth we have an uneven distribution of resources. We're not eating up all the resources, all right? We got farmlands that are where we're paying farmers not to grow crops. We've got people who hoard resources, whereas we have people who have none. All right, that we haven't even begun to look at what we could do if we really believe that we don't have enough resources for everybody. But it's not a matter of the sheer number of people on the earth that's the issue. It's an issue to consider, but it's not what our problem is now, and it certainly wasn't. I mean, God, think what they would think now.
Yeah.
Because in 1979, the world population was less than half what it is now.
It was 5 billion, they said. Yeah, now it's like pushing 9, right? So...
Yeah, so okay, a little over half then.
Right.
I actually thought it was... Well, I'm thinking more closer to the time I was born, which was several
Back
years
in the
before
20s?
1979. Yeah. Jeez, they had people there?
That was the thing I learned. I mean, obviously we went there, and there's like, because when you go to this thing, there's so many facts, and we're not paying attention, but we're just, when you're there, you're looking at stuff and just thinking about it. I didn't realize it's older than me. It's because I was born in 82. This is 80. It's like, oh, I didn't even realize it's that old. That's like crazy. Because for some reason in my head it was like 90 or 19. It feels like, feels like something of that era, not just. That's why I was saying, just this being conceived of in the 70s, in a time before all that stuff. It just, even pop culture was hitting that type of stuff. You know what I mean? Because like once you hit the 80s, it's like, yeah, there's conspiracy theories and movies and TV shows. All this stuff is going. It's like. You can, I don't know, it just seems like an idea. This is sort of innovative for the time it kind of popped up in.
Well, that's true. When there wasn't, I suppose the concept of the New Age,
maybe, yeah,
kind of mentality was around, but even that hadn't reached its popularity until further on into the 80s. So even them thinking, what would be an interesting monument to build, like, was a little bit forward thinking in the sense that they couldn't have predicted that people would show the level of interest they really have.
The story I want to hear is about him and their friends and the people that did this, just because, like I said, we grew up with people like this. Our grandparents were like this, it reminds me of my grandparents, all the people they talk to, like, well, we're going to, and like, you've been in that life, they go to church on Sunday, they do the thing, and they come, it's a very straightforward, like, everything's, and I can't imagine these guys getting out of Sunday service, having lunch, and then going, let's go get together and talk about the $30,000 monument we're going to build. It's like, what? It's like, it seems out of the stratosphere for what, like, for people that live that type of life to be doing. Because, I mean, and it also in turmoil, because it even sounds like afterwards he's friends with them, and they're, he's well-adjusted, like, it's just weird. It's very weird.
Well, it shows you how normal most things really are when you think about it, because like we said, Elberton, their whole thing was building monuments. They got granite monuments all over the town. I
guess that is true. It's like, we got all this stuff, let's just do something with it.
This guy wants to build this thing, we don't know what for, but it's an opportunity because we could have it built here in Elberton, and maybe that'd be a thing
I
people
guess that's true.
Come see.
That time nobody's building houses and buildings, because what was the interest rate, like 20% back then, like 1980 or something like that?
Well,
so
you go out there today, there's just land all over the place. It's not like that area, like I said, it's eerily undeveloped.
That's what's weird
when
about
you go
that.
Out there, there's nothing there.
Absolutely, that's why it felt like some weird another country, like we're like a Midsummer thing I'm comparing it to, because nobody was in that town. There wasn't even a Waffle House. There were no like franchise places. Remember, we went there.
No, it's a tiny town.
It was all mom
it's
and pop
9
stuff.
miles outside of town before you get to the Guidestones. Like, you're 10 miles out of town before you see the Guidestones.
The gas station. I mean, this was in 2008 or 9 when we went there. So it's like, but. There were such suburb goods. Like, where's the Walmart? There wasn't a Walmart out there when we went.
It's happening.
Yeah, it's like, so it was.
So this would be like that back then. We had them, but everyone didn't have them like they do now. But this was, and if it was a movie, this would be the point where you would look and see that you've got no bars.
You're right. Well, that's what I'm saying.
Guys,
there's something about like I mean, it's probably changed now. I'm sure they have 3 Applebee's around it right now or something. I don't know. We haven't been there recently. But I'm glad we went at that time, because that whole day, that not just the monument being there, but just the vibe of that whole place was so ghost towny. It was really creepy. Like, it was like, it's not creepy necessarily while we were there. We weren't scared. It wasn't like, we were like.
And the people weren't creepy.
They were nice.
Everyone there was super nice.
But when it's something that just sticks in your head when you leave, it just felt like, wow, this is just like out in the middle of, I keep saying this is for Georgia, nowhere, but just, it's out there.